Peel is so diverse. We have so many different cultures and different peoples living within our community. And so Pride is really representing those people and giving them a voice.
So I feel like I'm really just fighting for people like me to be seen and for us to, not feel like we're constantly fighting for, representation and equal rights and equal opportunities.
It's important for us to work on liberating those who face the most oppression in order for all of us to have access to that freedom.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juliette Jackson, and I am the Director of Culture and Inclusion at the Region of Peel. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather, which the Region of Peel operates. It is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit of the First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its inhabitants. I feel it's important to acknowledge the recent discovery of 215 children buried on the property of the Kamloops Residential School. Unfortunately, with over 150 more properties to search, there will be more. This is only the beginning of these gruesome discoveries that reveal Canada's active role in systemic discrimination. We must not only brace ourselves for more, but we must ask, what will it take to make the vision of Canada that has been cast worldwide real for everyone? It is in all of us to unpack the role we play in keeping these secrets and these systems alive and well. I would also like to call out the recent vicious attack on a member of the 2S LGBTQ+ community at Hanlan's Point on the Toronto Islands, yet another example of hate presenting itself in plain sight. We have to change this now so that future generations do not continue to inherit this legacy. It starts with us, and it starts today. Thank you all for attending. I want to welcome you to tonight's event, Peel's 2S LGBTQ+ communities, the complexity within. Today's event, by the way, is being recorded. And for those who may need closed captioning, please click on the CC button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to enable closed captioning. Before we dive deep into our agenda, I would like to acknowledge the decision that was made earlier this year to change Peel Pride Month to June versus July. This decision was made in an effort to align with celebrations happening across the GTA with the hope of eliminating any confusion among Peel residents. Although well-intended, we have heard about how this change has negatively impacted members of this community. In fact, we were called out for not consulting with the community, and rightly so. We received this call out, and we hope to position it as a call in. It is our intention to meaningfully engage in dialogue with this community to ensure that the voices needed to inform future decisions that impact the 2S LGBTQ+ community and all residents are shown the respect they deserve. Tonight's conversation will not be a one-time event that takes place once a year. We commit to ongoing conversations throughout the year that will build understanding of this community's diverse needs and how we can support this community, but most importantly, how we can take responsibility for all of the systems that we are caretakers for. Tonight, we will be hearing from a number of individuals, including our local mayors, who will provide an update on the efforts their cities are putting in place to build an inclusive community. But we are also privileged to be able to hear from two individuals from the 2S LGBTQ+ community, Yosh Pereira from Moyo Health and Community Services, and Anuradha Verma from QT BIPOC Saga, who will share their experiences, insights into complexities within the 2S LGBTQ+ community, the barriers experienced every day, and how we can work together to ensure meaningful engagement and collaboration. But first, I would like to invite our regional chair, Nando Unica, to start our event off with opening remarks. Chair Nando.
Juliet, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Very good. And first of all, I'm going to start with two apologies. Number one, I'm sorry you've got that dead photo of me on the screen, but that's my fault because I'm here at the house and I'm using my home computer and there was a glitch with seeing me personally. So I want to apologize for that. I owe you a second apology, and I appreciate Juliet and others that have sort of fallen on their sword for me. But I've got to step up and chair and say, boy, that whole schmozzle of moving July to June, that was really a lot of my doing for, I hope, good intentions, but what a great example that Juliet points out that you'll learn from your mistakes. When I became chair, and I follow the media, I follow a lot of events, and I knew of the events that were going on around us in June. And then I was said, Nando, in July, we're going to raise the flag and do this. I go, well, why aren't we doing it when everybody else is doing it? And I apologize for 30 years in politics, but in our world, when you do things like that after the fact, it's as though you're almost trying to minimize them. And I said, I didn't think that was right. We should be doing it when everybody else is doing. We want to be inclusive, part of the same. I don't want to look like we're deflecting it off. So that was just one opinion. Whether it made sense or not, the big mistake was I should have reached out and consulted more. So with thanks to everybody that sort of wants to say maybe we made a mistake, it was the chair that made the mistake. So I want to own that and I want to apologize for that. The second thing I want to do is I rarely read from my prepared notes, and I don't want tonight to be any different. So I'm grateful for the notes that I've got. But I tell you the thoughts and what this means to me. In conversations with Juliet, when we talk about what are we doing to reach out to our LGBTQ2S community, one of my Nandoisms, if you will, is I hate wasting people's time, especially my own. I don't want to go through this and pretend that we're getting to some goal if we don't have tangible results, because I don't want to waste your time. So I believe these exercises always have to have tangible thoughts and tangible outcomes that we can measure later to say we're getting somewhere. So that's the first thought I want to share with you as one of your colleagues. The second one, and I give Juliet credit, at the end of the day, when you look at the challenges that we have, what we have to understand and what I'm learning more of is it is very complex. It is not one size fits all, and we have to be mindful of that. The next thing that I would mention as well is with regards to learning and situations, one of the things that I've learned, it's one of my favorite words now, intersectionality. It was a word in my first 20 years of politics I might never have spoken because I've never understood it. Now I understand it far more fully through conversations like this that we are having. And so very, very important to realize that. Why is it that some people don't seem to get their fair share? And things compound and compound. It's one thing to be gay. It's quite another to be a white gay privileged person than someone of color from the BIPOC community and all the challenges that that brings. And we all need, including myself, a better understanding of that. And the last thought that I have for you is let's pick up on a positive. I trust many of you saw it this week. Football player in the United States in the NFL openly came out as gay. Apparently, it is the first time that a pro athlete, while still in the heart of their career, has done that. Many have come out afterwards, but apparently for one to say it during the height of their career is quite something. What I hope for is, and the athlete said it himself, he's hoping and I hope for, and I hope we all share this, that this isn't a news story anymore. it will become normal that people from all walks of life play football, and whether you're gay, any member of the LGBTQ questioning community, it's just normal life, and it isn't a noteworthy event because we've reached full acceptance. So, Juliet, those are my thoughts. Again, with my apologies that you couldn't see me directly. Again, with my apologies for that mix-up with trying to get more focus on the event. And I thank you for being invited. Let's carry on with the conversations, and let's keep talking about the tangible outcomes that we are working towards, that we can point to and say, this is why we've made the situation better. And I want to be your friend and ally in that regard. Juliet, thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Chair Nando. You are on the record as literally one of my biggest cheerleaders stepping into this role. This is hard work. It's hard work for everyone who's trying to really move the needle on systemic discrimination in our community, but you have really made it a pleasure, and you've made it easy, and you've cleared a path. So I want to thank you for your leadership and for your courage. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. At this time, I would like to introduce Mayor Patrick Brown to bring us greetings from the City of Brampton.
Hello, my name is Patrick Brown, Mayor of the great City of Brampton. I want to say happy Pride. This year it's a little bit different because we have virtual events in Brampton rather than gathering together. But on behalf of Brampton City Council, I wanted to say love is love is love, and we are proud to live in a community that celebrates our LGBTQ plus community. I also wanted to say that it's been a real honor to work with the City of Brampton to create a more active agenda for Pride Month. It was this City Council that participated for the first time ever in the Toronto International Pride Parade, and we were there in a sea of pink on our shirts saying Brampton is proud of our LGBTQ plus community. Love is love is love, and we just wanted to say all the best for the month of June. I hope you enjoy the online events, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Thank you so much, Mayor Brown, for your positive words. And yes, love is love is love. I would like to now introduce our first speaker, Mr. Yosh Pereira. Yosh is a manager for health promotion and prevention programs at Moyo Health and Community Services, formerly known as Peel HIV/AIDS Network. Yosh identifies as a queer South Asian settler on this land. He is a healthcare disruptor at heart, equipped with formal education in public health and clinical medicine. He has navigated a variety of experiences supporting health communications, primary healthcare delivery, and community health promotion programs. His experiences are shaped by the importance of centering community voices and working with communities to support health equity gains. Yosh Pereira.
Thank you, Juliet. That's a very kind, long introduction that I'm used to. My fellow service providers and 2S LGBTQ plus communities, good evening. My name is Yosh Pereira. I go by he, him pronouns. I am the manager of health promotion and prevention programs at Moyo Health and Community Services. I am a settler on this land, and I'm connecting to you folks from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I have been invited today to speak to you all about 2S LGBTQ plus communities. But before I share some of my thoughts with you folks, I'd like to first prepare the audience with a little bit of a trigger warning that I would be sharing some experiences around homophobia, transphobia, and also racism and xenophobia. As I share my content with you all today, I would like you folks to appreciate the fact that I am but one intersectional identity within the 2S LGBTQ plus communities. And as such, there is nothing that could replace meaningful dialogue and engagement with 2S LGBTQ plus communities in this region. Today, I would like to share a couple of reflections with you. And in doing so, I'm going to use a couple of visual aids. The three main areas that I would like to talk to you folks about is language, safety, and practice. The first is around language. What does pride mean to you? I'd like you folks to indulge me for a moment. Think about this statement. Think about this question. What does pride mean to you? Think about 3 words that you would answer this question with. And if you have a piece of paper handy, if you have your phone, if you have your computer, just write it down. 3 words that would speak to what pride means to you. I'll give you folks a couple of seconds. You see, language is this dynamic thing. It changes every day. When we look back in history, we see that gender and sex has evolved so much. It used to just be men or male. And we see that it went from male to female to intersex. And now in terms of gender, we look at man, woman, gender non-binary, gender queer. We know that language evolves, but it doesn't evolve on its own. There is so much activism and so much labor that goes into this progression of language. And when I think about what pride means, it is that acknowledgement and celebration of that work. Take a moment to indulge in another reflective activity. I want you folks to close your eyes for a moment and think about the last time you took on a personal or professional task, something big, or maybe something small, and you worked towards it really hard. And you got the support of perhaps your family members, your chosen family members, your friends, your peers, your colleagues at work, and maybe even your pet. And think about that final result. How did you celebrate that? How did you acknowledge that milestone? What did that look like? And I would welcome you to my table to celebrate that with me. And when I think about pride, it is exactly that. It is an acknowledgement of the work that has been done so long and so far in order to acknowledge our rights and freedoms as 2S LGBTQ+ communities. But looking around the table, I ask, what have you done outside of this month of June to earn your place at this table? To celebrate with us, to acknowledge what has been done so far? I ask you folks to sit with that. The next reflection I would like to share with you folks is one around safety. You know the golden rule. Treat people the way they wish to be treated. Well, that's really my quote. The golden rule is more around treat people the way you want to treat them. That's not really right, is it? It's because people live so many different lives. They've grown up in different homes. Their parents have looked different. Your school, your friends, the resources you have access to, they're all different. So you need to treat people the way they wish to be treated. How does this relate to safety? When I think about this month in June, there are so many complex feelings that I'm sitting with. As Juliet spoke to, the ongoing violence towards Indigenous communities, the homophobic acts of violence within Peel region as well as in Toronto, the Islamophobic incidences in London, Ontario. When I sit with these feelings, I think about, is it a happy pride? Is it a meaningful pride? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to erase all the accomplishments within the 2S LGBTQ+ communities, but it is a complex emotion, of safety that we're all sitting with. Another aspect around safety is the fact that history. Let's talk about history for a moment. Over the last 10 years, QT BIPOC Saga, Peel Pride, Pride Week in Peel, all of these grassroots organizations and community groups have contributed so much to 2S LGBTQ+ acknowledgement within the region. But I ask you, where is this written? Where is this acknowledged? Where is this celebrated? And when we do not acknowledge and celebrate this, could it mean that it does not exist? That it is erased? I ask you to sit with that. And I ask you to sit with when that is being erased. Do folks feel safe? Do folks feel like they belong? My final reflection that I'd like to share with folks today, and ignore that sentence for a moment, around practice. Let's talk a little bit about health, the social determinants of health. You know, we talk about income, employment, education, access to healthcare services, access to supportive groups and networks, physical spaces. These are all social determinants of health. Things that work together to make sure that people are healthy and well. And when I think about these social determinants of health, and when I think about the 2S LGBTQ+ community, there is an opportunity to do so much more. Queer and trans communities continue to be underemployed. In fact, evidence recently from Western University even suggested that queer and trans folks are 17% less likely to receive an interview for a job if their previous work experience outed them. My colleagues, my peers, even clients I work with continue to travel outside of this region to access healthcare services. Myself included. I travel up to 25 kilometers from my home just to access a healthcare provider that makes me feel safe. And remember, I talked about language? We talk about COVID, and we say that it is the worst epidemic that we've ever faced. HIV/AIDS has taken the lives of over 34.7 million people worldwide since the beginning of the epidemic. And we say that COVID-19 is the worst. And why am I sharing this statistic? Because HIV/AIDS disproportionately impacts 2S LGBTQ+ folks. And when we try to do work around this, folks ask for data. Data to represent and show that this is a need. I say that asking for data is a privilege. Waiting on data to act, that is oppression. As I share these reflections with you all, I ask that you remember those 3 words I asked you to write down. What does pride mean to you? Think about those 3 words and how it relates to these reflections that I've shared. I hope that these reflections are meaningful to you all as they are meaningful to me. And I leave you all today with a quote by the amazing social activist, author, professor, Bell Hooks. Love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And when I think about our region, I see some parts of this, but not all. And I encourage you all to reflect on this and see how we can achieve all aspects of this love for the 2S LGBTQ+ communities in Peel. I appreciate and thank everyone for this opportunity to share these reflections with you all. And I hand back over to Juliet.
Yosh, that was deep. That was deep, dude. Love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. Couldn't have found better words myself. I thank you so much for your transparency, honesty, for being willing to share your personal experience and for exposing some of what many of us may not know about what it is to live in your skin and to walk in your shoes. Thank you so much. You have poured yourself into us, and we want to make sure that we deserve you doing that. Thank you very much. For those who are dying to ask Yosh questions, there will be a question and answer period after our second speaker. So please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A section. There's a little question mark at the top right-hand side of your screen. So ask your questions and we will eventually get to them. Thank you very much again, Yosh. Next, I would like to introduce Mayor Crombie, who will bring remarks from the City of Mississauga.
Happy Pride Month. Mayor Bonnie Crombie here from the great city of Mississauga. I want to thank the Region of Peel for hosting this Pride celebration and for having conversations today around inclusivity and diversity in the 2S LGBTQ+ community and what more we could do to support those in our community. I'm grateful to be the mayor of such a diverse city like Mississauga, where our 2S LGBTQ+ community is celebrated and embraced. Everyone is welcome to let their light shine in our community. Diversity, equality, respect, and inclusion are at the core of our city and our region's identity. That is why I was so delighted that Mississauga and Peel Region rolled out Pride-themed corporate logos for the month of June. And as a proud PFLAG parent, I was honored to light our clock tower, the Pride colors, and raise the Pride Progress flag high at City Hall on June 15th. Although we couldn't gather this year as we normally would, we still had big plans to bring together our 2S LGBTQ+ community. On June 15th, I hosted a Pride celebration with Fluffy Souffle, a Toronto-based non-binary drag persona, for a fun-filled and informative interactive hour of lip-syncing, story time reading, and dance time. And our city's public art program, with funding from the Region of Peel, commissioned professional artist Viviane Rosas to paint a rainbow ground mural celebrating and honoring the 2S LGBTQ+ communities. The mural is located in Streetsville Village Square and is estimated to be completed by June 28th. So I encourage you to visit Streetsville to check out the beautiful mural going up. We also have a Rainbow Pride bench donated by Peel Pride that is installed in downtown Mississauga's Scholars Green Park. Mississauga is a place where everyone can grow and where everyone can thrive. We've made progress on 2S LGBTQ+ rights, but must acknowledge that more work needs to be done to make our community even more inclusive. I look forward to working closely with our community partners to support and celebrate our vibrant 2S LGBTQ+ community. Happy Pride Month!
Thank you, Mayor Crombie, for sharing the work that is happening in the city of Mississauga to support the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Ms. Anurata Verma. Anu is a queer, diasporic, sometimes femme, survivor, and mad identified. She organizes with QT BIPOC Saga, a grassroots gathering of queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities from across Peel. For over 10 years, Anurada has been engaged in community-based work to support queer and trans liberation locally. She works in 2S LGBTQIA+ health research, community-based consulting, and the arts as an independent curator. I give you Anu.
Thanks, Juliet. Good evening, folks. Greetings and salutations from a tired queer person. This has been an intense time. It's been a long month and it's been a long year. It's been a long 16 months. And I guess I want to start by just acknowledging how hard things have been. The conversation today about complexity and community is sort of subtitled Disrupting Neat Narratives, because I want to really challenge the idea that there is homogeneity within 2S LGBTQ communities. And language is important, right? Like Yosh talked about. And so it's not the LGBTQ community, it's communities. There are many, there are fissures and connections and disruptions between and amongst them all. And we'll talk about that. I want to start with a bit of a grounding. This kind of trio that you see on the screen there is the kind of acknowledgement that I have found helpful to have in my own work. And you heard a land acknowledgement at the beginning. As a child of immigrants who was born in this country, I think a lot about my responsibility to disrupt settler colonialism. I am grateful as an uninvited guest to be doing this work on the treaty and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, to be on Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Chippewa territory. If you are unfamiliar with giving land acknowledgements or thinking about them, we are very lucky that the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation have an incredible amount of resources available on their website, including details about each of the numbered treaties that refer to the place we currently call Peel. And those numbered treaties are 13, 14, 19A, 22, and 23. I also want to acknowledge the generations of Black folks who have been harmed through colonial, imperial, and violent practices of enslavement, displacement, forced migration, and much more. We can't be talking about social change, and we can't certainly be talking about queer and trans liberation without talking about the ways in which anti-Black racism have shaped this nation state and have shaped this particular locale that we're in. So I think my work is about uplifting and amplifying Black voices, and I want to give a shout out here, especially to those Black community leaders who have been fighting so hard in the last couple of years, especially, to make things change, to make our systems respond to things that people have been yelling about for a really long time. So that's the labor part of the acknowledgement. That's the land part of the acknowledgement. The labor part of the acknowledgement is a gratitude to all those who have made it possible for me to even be in spaces like this. All of those folks that I've shared space with, whether virtually or in person, who I've read, who've done the labor, emotional, intellectual, domestic, and otherwise to make it possible for me to be here. The love piece, I'm a very complicated Scorpio. Love is a complicated thing for me, but what I mean here is really the idea of finding and building connections with people. And there's a note there that says gratitude to all of the unnamed QT BIPOC folks in the burbs, who have made homes and built loving networks, who thrived with care and generosity. And I'm grateful to all of those who have come before me, who are here with me now, and who will come after. A content note. This conversation will include discussions of racism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and there is one mention of being a survivor. So I'm a survivor. To the other survivors who are here, I see you, and I'm grateful to be in this space with you.
And
You heard, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would you be able to go into presentation mode so we can see?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
How's that?
I think it's going to happen soon.
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Technology. We only tested this 75 times. All right. So a little bit about me. You heard a brief kind of bio about me. I will say the last sentence I'll direct you to is, you know, I am stubbornly committed to the suburbs of Peel as a place of brilliance. I think many colleagues and community members who I've worked with here over the last 10 plus years are confused about my stubborn commitment to Peel, and I just believe so deeply in the possibilities here. And that's why I have an opportunity to do a bunch of stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I also wanted to share that I think that, you know, the work that we do in lots of different spaces, paid or unpaid, all of those spaces are opportunities to build connections and to learn and unlearn, and to also be sharing educational kind of moments. Small plug, I have a weekly show on News Talk Saga 960 AM, which is a talk radio station. A real mixed bag of the kinds of shows that are on there, but there are a number of hosts who have the weekday 3 p.m. slot on the show called Peel Matters. I'm on Tuesdays, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to be able to bring critical conversations to a mainstream kind of media like a radio station. And you can always listen live, but who has a radio anymore? Or you can listen to the podcast versions of the show. And I would encourage folks to think about how you consume and share media as one of the ways that we think about learning and unlearning about 2S LGBTQ plus communities, but especially QT BIPOC communities. I also have this tiny little picture of a tiny little version of Anu with pigtails and probably a haircut I gave myself, if I think the timing is right, eating from a stainless steel cup that powdered chocolate mix, like quick, that you would put into milk. That was a favorite treat of mine. And I think a lot about what are the ways to honor the little person that I was, who was not yet maybe aware of all of the things that I could be or would be, and all of the different kinds of connections and relationships that I might have or would have. And I think for a lot of queer and trans people, being able to think back to who we used to be is a complicated thing. And so this is a new practice of mine to be able to honor the little Anu that was. A little bit about QT BIPOC Saga, a grassroots gathering of queer and trans BIPOC folks from across Peel. We started in 2016, and I'm a little square on your screen, but there's a great book called Any Other Way, How Toronto Got Queer. And I have an essay in here, a short essay that talks about the kinds of beginnings of that meetup as a space for BIPOC people who are queer and trans to gather after what felt like years of sort of being asked to wait until other things had settled down or been sorted out, or until there was additional funding, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to say that QT BIPOC Saga is unfunded. It is unaffiliated, which means it doesn't have formal partnerships with any organization locally. We've had some working relationships for events in the past, but currently no formal partnerships. We host monthly meetups that are now virtual, and then we organize other events periodically, and we've also been involved and engaged with advocacy in the community, and you'll hear some examples through the presentation. So here are some visuals. So there's a couple pictures here from events in Brampton. It's important to say we started in Mississauga and our name says Saga, but we've actually been doing things across Peel over the last several years, especially. And thanks to a very small short-term queer and trans youth grant that some folks within our community secured a couple of years ago, we did start doing Brampton meetups as well. These events are from left and right from Pride in the Square, held at Brampton's Garden Square. The left, we asked folks to share messages to QT BIPOC folks in community. And I just want to point to how much affirming statements or affirmations or validations can go a long way. As you'll hear me talk about later on, this doesn't always feel like a great place to live or work or play or study or be. And so those affirmations really go a long way. The middle picture is from a youth fair that was organized at one of the Brampton Library branches, where I had some really interesting conversations with folks. And thinking back to Nando's comments early on about intersectionality, I think one of the most crucial things that Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw offered us when talking about intersectionality was opening up ways to talk about various systems of oppression together. And at this particular public engagement kind of outreach promo session, I found people were okay to talk about gender and sexuality, and other folks were okay to talk about race, but it was difficult to have conversations about the ways in which those systems of power intersect with one another. So a complicated kind of thing. Here's a few other images that reflect the kinds of work that QT BIPOC Saga has done, kind of building connections and networks together. So on the left, we've daydreamed a lot at monthly meetups. So we've daydreamed about the kinds of spaces that we want to have together, physical spaces that we could make happen, where people could be their whole selves and where we didn't have to go through a ton of bureaucracy or kind of beg for people to lend us space or try to cobble together coins to be able to pay for booking spaces in the region. And so we imagined a queer hub that was a space for people to do art, for people to have tea or coffee or food, and for people to kind of hang out, maybe exhibit things that they're working on, a place that had a lot of plants, etc. On the right, at the top, is just an example of a poster from an event that we did in collaboration with Studio 89, which is a social enterprise cafe in Mississauga, youth-run, youth-led, and the art gallery. And it was a really beautiful conversation about faith, sexual and gender identity. And I think the thing I want to impart to you there is these neat narratives that queer and trans folks will be alienated from faith communities or alienated from any kind of like faith practices. We really do need to disrupt that. So people, even the question of how do you reconcile XYZ faith with your sexuality or your gender? The panelists who are from across Peel rejected the question. That's not the question that they want to answer. It's not about reconciliation at all. It's something more nuanced than that. At the bottom, folks who have done deputations to the Peel Police Services Board will recognize this room perhaps. We did a deputation to, this is a couple of years ago before, of course, the school resource officers, which is cops in schools, before that program was canceled. And the deputation talked about the impact on queer and trans students within schools, which have not been really documented that well, but what was it really important to us to say was that the SRO program is really harmful, and we'll talk about the complex relationship between queer and trans communities and the police. So this was just one example where we tried to be kind of public, and we joined many other voices that day. We were not successful that day, but it's good to know in 2020 that change happened. I want to ask this question for contemplation around whose organizing is considered appropriate or respectable. QT BIPOC Saga has been around since 2016. We have had media coverage. We have organized events that have been quite public at very well-known organizations or locations. And yet, as a group, we are rarely, if ever, invited to the table. Even when having conversations with people in positions of power, today is not the name, shame, or blame game, but I will say, even when having conversations with people in power, they forget that they've, met the group or that they've heard about the work that's happening. We're not counted, we're not considered. Our lives and experiences are kind of disregarded when making decisions about what pride could look like or what the 2S LGBTQ community wants or needs. And so this question about whose organizing is considered appropriate or respectable is also one that we can connect back to other spaces, parallel and connected spaces of talking about the kinds of systemic change we need. What does it mean that community organizers like David Boswell or members of Advocacy Peel, for example, who have been really active on talking about anti-Black racism, have had to say over and over again that they're getting shut out of conversations with people in power who say that they're committed to dismantling anti-Black racism? What does it mean that we have to do the work of reaching out to folks? That some organizations are recognized, are applauded and lauded publicly, while others are not? What does it mean that media shares what's happening locally and there's not a fact checking to say, hey, maybe there are spaces that are grassroots organized where people are meeting and gathering? I'm going to talk about history. Folks who know me personally know that I'm very fixated on origin stories and histories, and this is going to be a really high level recap. But what we know is that very little is documented well about the histories of queer and trans organizing in Peel. But they have been organizing since at least the 70s, since the formation of the municipalities, and at great cost. The great cost in the 70s and 80s were threats, events being canceled, really troublesome statements kind of being made about community members. And the costs now are employment sometimes, reputation, fear of opportunities, and like actual literal hate. So here we go. Really high level. I'm guessing that many folks won't know some of these items, so you can tell us in the Q&A a little bit about what you might be interested in. In the 1970s, Gay Equality Mississauga, GEM, was an incredible organizing space where folks organized events, did advocacy, did so much, like full page ads in the Mississauga News, and really tried hard to not just create space for queer and trans folks to gather, but also to kind of disrupt the normative statements that were being made about queer and trans people. There's a wonderful book about the history of queer and trans organizing. There's actually a couple of big volumes. And I want to tell you something that happened in 1978 in Mississauga. So the Mississauga Library Board canceled the showing of the film The Naked Civil Servant, which was to be shown at the Central Library in February. The film depicted the life of openly gay English writer Quentin Crisp and was to have been followed by a discussion led by Elgin Blair, who's a GEM coordinator, staff coordinator at that time. Councillor Hazel McCallion, who was the councillor at that point, a member of the library board, remarked, "I'm not sure a public body would promote a topic that is not generally accepted by the public." In the late 1970s, Peel Police's morality squad, we had a morality squad, conducted raids, including at Rockwood Mall. They published in the papers the names of those men that they caught during the raids. Shift over to 1980s. Many of the origins of the pieces of queer and trans organizing or community spaces that we know and appreciate have deep connections to Peel. So a Brampton mom begins organizing support for parents. This is the origin stories of what we call PFLAG. And part of what that mom did was actually publish her phone number in the paper and saying that she would be available to other parents for support. GEM continues to organize, including creating dance spaces. And I point to that because the lack of spaces for people to gather for dances, for social things, is a huge, huge gap in Peel right now and has been for the last number of years. In the 1990s, the Mississauga Library, and led by a Black gay librarian who worked there at the time, organized public programming, which was deemed controversial by some. Some of the titles and framing of the events had to be changed because of fear and because of homophobia. Let's just be real about that. In the late 1990s, Desh Pradesh, which was a queer trans South Asian festival, it was from the late 80s until 2001, held a workshop that spurred the development of a film called Rewriting the Script, a love letter to our families about South Asian queer and trans community members. That workshop was called So I Came Out to My Mom at the Dixie Mall Food Court. And I laugh because I have deep connections to Dixie Mall and many other malls, and I think it's important that we name these public spaces. In the 2000s, after a 1999 incident, a community member, a trans woman of color, a Black trans woman, took Peel Police to the Human Rights Tribunal, which resulted in a ruling which basically said that Peel Police's treatment of trans folks was not okay. And this is before gender identity and expression were even protected grounds under the Ontario Human Rights Code. And that changed policy for police forces across Ontario. Queer It Up began as a march at Dundas and Dixie on the sidewalk in 2008 as a community-led effort, in part organized by the East Mississauga Community Health Centre, what was then called Peel HIV/AIDS Network, Associated Youth Services of Peel, and Public Health. In the 2010s, some of you will remember this, the fight for gay-straight alliances within Catholic schools, both English and French, began and happened in Peel, Mississauga, and Brampton, respectively. Pride Week in Peel turned into an event that came to Celebration Square. That was my time, the heyday. And for the first time ever, politicians paid attention to queer people. It could be because a municipal election was coming. However, politicians were there. There was advocacy also in the late 2010s, and this is what I want to point to when I mentioned Brampton, Pride in the Square in Brampton and Garden Square. QT BIPOC Saga wrote to then interim chief McCord to demand that Peel Police not attend Garden Square events around Pride in uniform, which they agreed to. It's also important to note that in the time frame of the late 2010s, with the incredible amount of organizing by Black Lives Matter, which has had a Peel presence and has done incredible work in Peel as well, the conversation about police presence and the relationship with police between queer and trans communities came to a head in terms of a division based on race. Peel Police, like other police forces, so frustrated with not being able to participate in Toronto Pride, traveled to New York to participate in their Pride. A local LGBTQ organization said that they would boycott going to Toronto Pride because Peel Police was their partner, their core partner. Moving to the 2020s, it's funny to have that as a decade, that artists who have connections to Peel receive widespread recognition. I'm thinking of drag artists like Mango Lussie. I'm thinking of folks who organized the kind of like quarantine queer and trans parties online. And I'm thinking of many, many others who have been really public and visible. And a lot of times their bios actually get edited, they edit them themselves, to say that they're from Toronto and not from Peel. They have to leave to be able to get the recognition and get the opportunities and get paid. And for the first time, this just happened, a Black, disabled, queer, non-binary candidate is running federally in Mississauga. It's Tanisha Samuels. That's a pretty big first. Let's talk a little bit about the complexities of the suburbs. So there's something about the very nature of the suburbs that makes it complicated for QT BIPOC folks here. So let's remember, stretch back in time. The origin of the suburbs is really a middle to upper class settler colonial fantasy as a way for white folks to escape the inner city where poor folks and racialized folks were. The narrative around the suburbs of Peel was that it was for folks who were middle class, and that's why the folks who do work around disrupting narratives that poverty doesn't exist here have to work doubly, triply, quadruply hard because of this really dangerous narrative that this is a place only for middle class and up folks. The structure of how the suburbs are built mean that things are far apart. The car-centric nature of the suburbs makes it difficult for queer and trans folks, young people, etc., to be able to actually gather and find their ways together. Here's an interesting narrative that's come up. I'm sorry if you have to turn your heads, but an interesting narrative that's come up in the last number of years as the suburbs of Peel become more and more racialized. And I want to say also that we know that there have been racialized folks here since the beginning, since before it was Peel, when it was a series of villages. And yet those narratives and those experiences have been erased. But what we are told is that all of the queer and trans people are white. And implicitly, all of the racialized and immigrant folks are homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic. This came to a head in the mid-2000s when there was conversations about same-sex marriage, and politicians certainly kind of fueling the fire to say, well, of course, communities of color, immigrants are not going to support that. And so what we tell other folks also, and the we is in quotation marks because it's certainly not me, but it might be some of you, we tell people that narratives that only showcase white, queer, and trans people are okay, and that conversations or discourses about what is welcome and supported within immigrant and racialized communities, that those narratives suggesting one way of thinking, being, or acting are okay too, and they're not. We need to be able to disrupt, like Yosh encouraged us to do, we need to be able to disrupt the ways that Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racism are underpinning all of those pieces. This is a long list. I want to talk a little bit about the ways in which QT BIPOC folks experience the suburbs here. So I'll be fast because this is a lot of content. Safety is a really complicated thing here, in the sense that lots of people have said over and over again that they would not necessarily feel so comfortable being in public in Peel. QT BIPOC Saga has always held its meetups in a private location that we do not advertise, and that's because people have talked very seriously about safety concerns. And yet, there's something really lovely for people about being able to easily go to ethno-specific grocery stores, to be able to go to events, to hear languages that you speak being spoken, and to also be maybe connected to family, whether that's family of origin or chosen family. And yet it's dangerous for people to be themselves, to hold their partner's hand, even near square one. People have said over and over again, they would not want to hold their partner's hand when they're going anywhere. They experience harassment on the bus, and they feel like they get stared at in public spaces. People are always leaving to go elsewhere, to get work, which is connected to number 4, to find community, to access healthcare services, which really are like so overwhelmingly missing here. In a region with so many people, the fact that we have so few services should be shocking and appalling to folks. I think pretty much every other month someone leaves that is connected to QT BIPOC Saga, and they either go to Hamilton or they go to Toronto. It's really expensive to rent here, and so if you can just cobble together a little bit more, you could probably afford to live in Toronto, or people are moving to Hamilton because it's slightly more affordable. There's very, very serious isolation. It's really hard to meet and connect with folks, and it's hard to feel like you belong in a place where there's very little that looks like it's aimed at you, and there's very little program services, activities, etc., that seem to care about queer and trans folks. There's serious problems of underemployment, and those have been exacerbated by the pandemic. I should pause here to say that COVID has impacted queer and trans communities in really, really significant ways. Between the loss of spaces for young people, and think about those folks who don't have safe home spaces, the fact that you have to be at home all the time when virtually learning, that has been really challenging. But employment has also been one facet of queer and trans life, and for QT BIPOC folks who face multiple barriers in terms of accessing employment, there are really very few job opportunities. There are very few employers who are adequately queer and trans positive. Even the city of Mississauga, as shared at the most recent Diversity, Inclusion, and Advisory Committee meeting, most members of the LGBTQ community who work there would not talk about their sexual orientation at the workplace. Like a huge number, like 40-something%. And there's serious underrepresentation even within the municipalities. That says something. The local visibility of LGBTQ plus positivity is not necessarily representative of QT BIPOC folks. What does it mean to be in a place where people say that diversity is our strength, if that's the motto everywhere, and yet visible representation of queer and trans folks is always white? We end up meeting each other in other places other than Peel. It's actually kind of hilarious that that happens. One of the things that was really interesting in being able to do Pride organizing in Peel in July rather than June was it gave us a chance to do outreach at Toronto Pride. And I remember meeting dozens and dozens of people who said, wow, I didn't even know there was anything in Mississauga or Brampton. And we met them in Toronto. We wouldn't have been able to connect with them in Peel. As you heard me say, there's incredible creative and community contributions. The talent of folks is just amazing here. We show up for each other in ways that are unrecognized and really at the grassroots level, being able to text one another, mutual aid, redistribution of resources, etc. There's also a real serious disengagement. Most QT BIPOC folks that we know are not interested in engaging with politicians or things that cities or the region is organizing because they feel like those places have failed them. And that's a difficult pill to swallow, I imagine, but that is the reality. Number 10, it's June, so everyone wants to put up a rainbow flag. And the question that I often ask folks is, you know that queer and trans people, especially QT BIPOC folks, exist all months of the year. We don't just want a flag put up or the idea of saying like, oh, who's a speaker that we could quickly get together? We need and want more. So here's where lip service and tokenism comes in. Currently, a total of $0 is allocated to directly support 2S LGBTQ communities locally. I'll say that again, $0. There's some money allocated from the region to pay for public displays of pride. So the mural, for example, that Mayor Crombie talked about, and the rainbow crosswalk that exists in Brampton, sticker rather, not total crosswalk, but actual money to support queer and trans people directly, to change their material conditions, to change employment, access to housing, healthcare, programs, services, etc. That doesn't exist here. And so we need more. And in fact, when it comes time to organize events, this event might actually be the exception. Toronto is the place where people seem to seek speakers, artists, etc. This proximity to Toronto has facilitated a real lack of commitment to build the much needed services, resources, and supports. It's a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, people assume that, well, you could just go to Toronto and get access to your doctor, go to the village, etc. And on the other hand, it's sort of like, oh, well, we'll lament that Peel, people said this to me a lot, Peel is 20 years behind Toronto. I've heard that refrain so many times. And we can't actually replicate the structures and processes of Toronto because our context is so different. We have a different opportunity given the fact that there are so many racialized folks here. We don't need a 519 version in Peel because what neighborhood would it be in? And the idea of flocking to one central place, that's not actually the reality of where QT BIPOC people live or organize or gather. And in the last 10 plus years, very little has changed in terms of access to programs and services. And in fact, some programs and services stopped and started, some ended altogether. But overall, the kind of growth that we would expect in a growing region, the services have not kept pace at all. And the fact that if you do quick searches of, different healthcare providers, different regional authority websites, you'll find that there is very little to no mention of 2S LGBTQ communities as a whole. And that kind of assumption that we're not there or that there's so few of us, there's about 1 million queer and trans people in Canada now, according to StatsCan. And that's an underreporting, but that's what we kind of have some access to data around right now. And so some questions for contemplation. I want to offer up, how really are QT BIPOC folks considered and valued by those who make decisions in Peel? Right now, we'd probably say they aren't. And how do norms of whiteness perpetuate individual, collective, and organizational assumptions about what it means to be queer or trans here? And that could be the assumption that you come out, and this really normative, narrow understanding of what it means. You come out when you're a teenager, your parents either accept you or don't, and you kind of go through your life. I'm going to read a very tiny passage from this contribution to this collection that kind of grounds it in space and place. And this is the content warning around being a survivor. So unlike the tropes of queer awakening, I can't trace my way back to a singular moment. Sexuality and sexual abuse or molestation were intertwined in my youth. To survive, I've done community and anti-violence work on queer and trans issues. But if I reach back in my experience as an ugly, unpopular kid in a screwed up family, I just believed that queerness was totally all right, even if I didn't have the language to say so until I was 16, and asked Maud, my only friend who was sexually active, to come with me to the Healthy Sexuality Clinic at Highway 10 in Dundas to talk about my desire. A PO public health staff person interpreted what I said and taught me the word bisexual. It's important to note that the internet was just a few years old at this point, and I mostly used it to email my friends or join random chat rooms and develop likely unhealthy relationships with strangers. And I want to talk about that space piece a little bit, and I'll just name drop a few places. So Highway 10 in Dundas, not just pure public health, but also a space where there was a gathering for queer and trans people at one point. Square One as a place that also had like an LGBTQ youth kind of space, gathering space at one point. Thinking about Celebration Square, Dundas and Dixie, Port Credit, where that was the only time when we had a pride march there that people yelled homophobic slurs at us from their stores and from the street. Thinking about Brampton as a place where people can run for office, and Streetsville too, let's be real. People can run for office with homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic tweets in their history, and their parties say, no, that person doesn't mean that anymore, and it's okay, and they'll continue to run. There's a lot there. And I guess I want to leave us, before we get to the question and answer, with a real kind of deep gratitude to all those folks who have made it possible to have conversations about white supremacy in this conversation, to have conversations about the way pink washing or rainbow washing is taking place this month and in previous years, and to ask us to think about other ways that we might think about engagement, think about honoring the life of QT BIPOC people broadly, each of their individual lives, and also to think about what it means to be challenged and disrupted in our normative and neat ways of thinking. Thank you so much. Gratitude for this conversation. I am going to pass it back over to Juliet. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Anu. That was heavy. It was heavy. You carried a heavy load on your shoulders there. Couldn't tell you could carry that weight. I just really want to thank you for, number one, being so honest about your personal experiences. But what we know is that we can't change anything if we don't embrace the truth. So thank you for bringing the truth, for being honest and having the strength and courage to just tell us, what the reality is. So we really appreciate you. We could have listened to you all night. We're up against it with the time and everything, but we do want to get now to at least a couple of questions and answers. And for those that we can't get to, we do have a ZZG culture and inclusion at peelregion.ca mailbox. I'm going to try to have that dropped into the chat where all of you can get to it. For any questions that aren't answered today, if you're able to email us, we can get back to you directly with those responses. We'll find a way to do that. So let me see what question to choose first. I'm getting a spinny thing, sorry. Spinning in real time. Okay, so here is the first question. I work with seniors and there is no service for the community, and the seniors that are LGBTQ have to hide it even though they dream of being open before death. We have given them no space after the lives they have led, no retirement homes. Will there be any in the future? How do we help them and how? So that sounds like a question for us here at the region. And so this issue actually has been brought forward by our long-term care leaders. And so I wouldn't say we have an answer to it specifically right now, but we are basically, number one, exploring the fact that we need to educate staff. We need to make sure people understand it's a privilege to work in their home, and that we need to respect people in their home. and that's pretty much our position, but also to find ways to really allow them to live their lives in pride and in truth. So there is further exploration on that, and I hope I've done that answer justice, because I know there's people here who work in that area who probably have more information than I have on that right now. I don't know if Anu or Yosh wanted to speak to that. Just nod your head if any of you are interested in speaking to that specific topic of seniors. All right, I'm going to move to the next question. So this one is, how can we create safety and inclusivity for our 2S LGBTQ plus communities in our workplace? I'm going to ask both of you to respond to that, starting with Yosh. How can we create safety and inclusivity for our 2S LGBTQ plus communities in our workplaces?
Thanks, Juliet. I think, organizations don't have to necessarily go at that task alone. There are some organizations, especially aid service organizations across the province, who have meaningfully tried to champion 2S LGBTQ plus well-being. That being said, I think there is no replacement for meaningful engagement within your organization. One piece of advice I might offer is, if the workplace wasn't safe enough for folks to actually come out and say they're queer to begin with, you might want to start working with a consultant or other organizations first, because asking folks to share how to make a workplace safe for them, you're kind of asking them to do work outside of the scope of what their work might actually be to begin with. So yeah, and Anu, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of, creating safety for folks, it's a big one. I mean, I think it's just like any other employment equity kind of consideration. So one, we need to be thinking about representation in the workplace. So, like how, I mean, do you even have any queer and trans folks who are actually there? Two, what's the workplace culture that exists? And so having a good hard look at the ways that cis heteronormative approaches are perpetuated. I can't tell you how many lunchrooms I've stood in and people asked me if I had a boyfriend as casual lunchroom conversation. The third piece is thinking through what are your organizational values, your deep values about how you are thinking through your presence kind of in the community, not just for your staff, but in the community. And the fourth would be taking a good hard look at policies and procedures through an equity lens, because there are a lot of different ways that organizations are perpetuating cis heteronormative ways of thinking and being that are actually really, really harmful. And having good HR processes where people can bring forward complaints without fear of reprisal. As someone who's experienced reprisal and lost my job because of talking about racism and homophobia, it's a really, really scary thing. So really working hard to be able to get that change at all levels of the organization. Thanks, Juliet.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm going to do one more because I know that we are running late. I'm going to find something that I really want to hear your voices address. This one's interesting. So Brampton is planning to do a gay pride crosswalk in the downtown. Meanwhile, I couldn't find a single endocrinologist in Brampton to refill a prescription for HRT. How do I explain to the government that their priorities need improvement? So this sounds like advocacy, but I'd really like to hear, let's start with Anu. Just, what is your response to this person who's asking the question?
Yeah, this is an excellent point, and something that, I think Yosh alluded to. I tried to talk about it also. No disrespect to crosswalks, but literally no QT BIPOC person asked for a crosswalk. I just want to say that on the record. No QT BIPOC person asked for a crosswalk, and when it was decided, no QT BIPOC led organization was consulted for that. what we would really like, what folks would really like, is to have this huge gap in healthcare providers addressed. Every time we have gone to any of our local politicians, unfortunately, we get the same answer, which is healthcare is it's provincial jurisdiction, so you have to actually go to the province to talk about it. However, there is an opportunity for the regional municipality, especially through public health, but also each of the lower tiers, to say, hey, if we actually want to say that we're a queer and trans positive place, we need to desperately encourage healthcare providers to recognize that queer and trans care is within their scope of practice. To not be seeing queer and trans clients is it's literally a neglect and lack of care. And we don't have a process right now where people can raise those concerns and complaints and be taken seriously. So for Anonymous who's raising this, I am so sorry that this has happened to you. I have tons of friends who also can't access endocrinologists or even a queer and trans positive physician to get them started on HRT or any other kind of care. This is a call to all of the folks who are in power to say, you are letting folks down in these really, really serious ways, and putting crosswalks and making big public statements is helpful to a certain amount of the community, but it lets all of the rest of us down. And we just need to yell louder, because they only listen when we yell louder, I think. I'll pass it to Yosh, who also has lots of experience with the healthcare lens.
I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, Anu, in sort of sharing that context. I think there is an opportunity for leadership within the regions and municipalities to really work with community. Like I said, what have you done to come to the table to celebrate and acknowledge Pride? I think there is so much work that can and will and must and should be done, but the question is really, is it going to be community driven and led and accomplished, or will you be part of that process in making sure that we secure safer spaces and safer care for community? It's and I'm so sorry for Anonymous as well. I think those would be my thoughts. Yeah, over to you, Juliet.
Thank you both so much. I wish that we had more time. I just don't, I'm sure people have commitments after this. Thank you so much for your responses. Thank you so much for throwing your heart into this. And just thank you so much for trusting us and being willing to come on this stage. We know that we have work to do, and you've pointed a lot of the issues out. And we are serious about a next step, which is engagement. And we know that people aren't interested in engaging, but we hope that we can earn that trust and to really begin to have a meaningful dialogue, increase understanding, and to find ways to leverage our power to do better. Thank you so much. So at this time, I would really like to just request people give us 5 extra minutes so that we can wrap up if possible. I'd like to quickly introduce Mayor Alan Thompson, who brings his greetings, but then we have, closing remarks from one of my favorite people, our CAO here from the Region of Peel, and I'd really like for everybody to just stay behind to listen. So, Mayor Alan Thompson.
I am Alan Thompson, the Mayor of Caledon. I'm very pleased to be part of Peel Region's Pride Month celebration. The complexities within. I've learned so much in my journey as an elected representative and the last 6 years as mayor. Here's what I know for sure. The complexities around who we are inside and out, how we identify, who we love are what makes our communities vibrant and alive. I want Caledon and Peel Region to continue to grow in a safe, healthy, inclusive community and region. We have to work hard at it, and we have to work together to achieve it. On behalf of the town of Caledon, council, our staff, and our entire community, I wish everyone a happy Pride Month.
Thank you so much, Mayor Thompson, for your words of support and commitment to really addressing some of the issues that are impacting these communities so seriously and to making things better. Finally, at this time, I would like to proudly introduce our Region of Peel CAO, Janice Baker, with closing remarks.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you to Yosh and Anu for your stories and sharing with us today. It's a pleasure really to be with you this evening and attend this event. And of course, I also want to speak on behalf of our entire team at the Region of Peel for those of you who have come to listen and to share our Pride event this evening. And I want to acknowledge all of our municipal partners who've helped us bring this event from idea to reality. We've heard some tremendous experiences and stories tonight from Yosh and Anu. You've helped bring attention to the barriers and challenges that are faced by the LGBTQ2S+ community, or as Anu says, communities, and the impact of COVID-19 on our lives. The Region of Peel's vision is to build a community of life for all our residents and businesses in Peel. We have a vision of a place where everyone enjoys a sense of belonging, where everyone has access to the services that they need, and where people can thrive through each stage of their lives. What you've shared with us tonight is we have work to do to achieve that vision. And your experiences are, in some cases, actually in stark contrast to that vision and really do speak to the work that we have left to do. We know that throughout the pandemic, we've seen great examples of community outreach and support, but also heartbreaking acts of racism and discrimination towards a number of different groups. We know that for many people, discrimination was an everyday experience before the pandemic began, which is why the region has been working hard towards improving diversity, equity, and inclusion across Peel. The work has already begun and has the full support of our executive leadership team. Your voices will provide the guidance, the insights that we need to help shape these changes. By listening, really listening to your experiences and inviting you to be part of our decision-making process, we know that we can move forward together. Alongside you, we want to develop programs and services that are tailored to the diverse needs of our Peel residents. We have that capability to make great progress, and if we continue to listen and learn from you, we will achieve better outcomes for our community. So thank you again for joining us tonight. Every step that we take towards fostering equity and inclusion is a step in the right direction. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you all very, very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Janice, for your leadership and support on this journey. As you said, there is much work to do, and we are prepared to do it. And so we hope that we can earn the trust of the community as we express those words and turn them into action. There is so much hate around us, and we know the only way to combat it is with love. And that's part of what we want to do. Before we end, I would like to close our event by sharing a short video which brings together many of the events that have been happening across the community to commemorate Peel Pride. Thank you again for your attendance, for spending time with us. Have a great night and happy Pride Month. Thank you.